Hey garden nerds, Christy Wilhelmi here. In a recent post, I may have mentioned that I'm growing 15 varieties of kale, and the word got out that people wanted to know what varieties I was growing. So this video today is going to be me showing you exactly what varieties of kale I am growing this fall. Look at my bed. Okay, that sounded weird. This is my kale bed. I am a kale whore though. I mean, that's self-described. That is what I call myself. But just so you know, that's only something I call myself. I don't call anyone else that. Anyway, this is my kale bed this year. It rotates every year to help prevent disease, and I'm growing them 1 per square foot according to square foot gardening method. There are 15 square feet in this bed because there's a corner missing for decorative purposes. But I actually have 2 of 1 variety in here, but the 15th is somewhere else, and I will show you that in a moment. First, let's take a look at what's growing in this bed up close and personal. The whole bed, as you can see, is pretty colorful. I love growing things that have purple in them. It is some of my favorite varieties that are in here, and you'll notice in the back here I have floating row cover that is usually over the whole bed, but it's pulled back so you can see what's going on. Let's start at the back. This is actually more like a collard than a kale. This is Truncuda beira kale. It's a Portuguese kale, and like I said, it's more of a collard than a kale. Hardy stems and leaves. Next one over, this is a first for me that I'm growing this year. It's called Mars Landing, and it is gorgeous. Purple, purple, purple. Can't not grow it. I can't help but grow this kind of kale. It's just too pretty. Next one over, this is Fizz kale, and you can see the leaf is very different. Mostly looks like a house plant, but it's really interesting and different, so I'm growing it. And then I'll come over to the other side in a minute. This is Vates Blue kale, and it is one of the most durable kales I've got. Vates Blue. It's in here. I don't know if you can see this. These are not weeds actually that are growing in here. This is Volunteer Minutina from last year, and I'm just keeping it. That's a lettuce I'll transplant somewhere else. This next one is called Hanover kale, and it gets really tall, and the leaves are very much like a Siberian type kale, very pretty. The one on the end also looks like a Siberian, except that my tag is missing and I can't verify that. I'll have to go look at my journal and see what is supposed to be planted here, because the tag disappeared. Another one of my really favorite kales here is Dazzling Blue kale. It is a purple lacinato. It has that purple stem, and the leaves are very much like a traditional lacinato, but this one grows really well for me and I enjoy it a lot. Next up, Red Russian. This is pretty standard. You'll see these at the nursery when you go to buy kale plants at the nursery. It actually has kind of like fuzzy little hairs that grow out of it. It's very strange, but I find it enjoyable. And I opened this whole thing up and found a grasshopper inside, so that's what this damage is here. Next up, I left the best for last in the front here. This is dwarf Siberian kale. These are tender leaves. They're really for people who find kale really too tough. Seek out Siberian varieties and dwarf Siberian. This is dwarf, and then I also have true Siberian over here. And in the middle is scarlet kale, which is a showstopper. You can't help but love this. It's purple. It's just gorgeous. I absolutely adore it. All right, and then over here, in front of Hanover kale is another one that looks a lot like it. It's called Premier kale, and it looks like kind of a hybrid-ish combination between a Siberian and a curly. It's really a nice kale. I enjoy eating that one. I grew that for the first time last year. And then, of course, lacinato. Lacinato right here is your traditional, you're probably used to seeing this the most. This is pretty standard. I love lacinato. It shows up that green contrasting the other greens in the garden is so beautiful. Moving on to our final two. This is Red Ursa kale. It is like a red Russian, pretty close to a red Russian, looks very much like that. Purple stem, really nice sweet leaves, beautiful. And then the last guy back here is Cyber Frill, and it is sort of like, it's right next to its cousin Fizz. Cyber Frill is a frilly leafed, curly type kale that I have enjoyed throwing in the mix. But there's one more kale that is not in this bed that I want to show you. Let's go. Over here in the container garden is one last kale, and it is all by itself for a reason. This is called 1,000 head kale, and the leaves, each leaf is supposed to grow to about 3 feet long. So I put it in this big tomato pot. This is a 16-inch tomato pot because it's going to get huge, and I'm probably going to need to thin this out to just one plant. But I've got it protected right now under a tomato cage with some bird netting to keep the rats from eating it, and letting it go. And these are only a couple of weeks old, which is, if that's any indicator of how big this thing is going to get, hold on, look out. It's going to be fun. So try 1,000 head kale if you've got the room. I hope you enjoyed the tour of my kale bed. There are a couple things before I let you go that I want you to know about growing kale. They are susceptible to cabbage worms, which come from the cabbage moths, those little white butterflies that have little black diamonds on their backs. They fly around, they lay their eggs on the undersides of leaves. I've got a blog post I'm going to put in the description below for how to identify and remove them. They're fairly easy, but the biggest thing you could do is put floating row cover over this and leave it there as long as possible. It'll protect your kale from not only cabbage moths, but also critters like rats who find kale very tasty once they figure out what it is. All right, that's it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this answers your question, and I hope you include a few more interesting kale varieties in your garden when the time comes. If you're not growing this fall, try them in spring. You'll find a lot more information on how to grow kale in my book, Gardening for Geeks, and don't forget to check out my new book, Grow Your Own Mini Fruit Garden. Thanks for watching. Happy gardening.